Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen. It really means a lot to us for you to do that. Before I introduce our very interesting guest, I want to complain for a minute. I use these few minutes at the beginning of every podcast, either talk about something that I'm excited about or to talk about something I'm irritated by. And unfortunately, I'm irritated by how Uber Eats is in talks with Grubhub about a possible acquisition. This combined company would make them the dominant company in sort of food delivery right now, at least according to NPR. And I think there's kind of a yuck factor in that kind of consolidation because of what's happened with the restaurant industry of late, because so many restaurants have had to close their doors. Some of them probably permanently, putting not only their own workers, chefs and cooks and dishwashers and their own delivery folks out of business, but also creating a lot of disruption for farmers who supplied those restaurants. And so I have this sort of, icky feeling about this possible merger or acquisition, whatever they're calling it, because I think it's profiting off something that is already so tragic and terrible and is affecting so many people. And I think that, the more restaurants can keep, and farmers as well can keep sort of money within their own businesses and not be paying, not having a lot of fees go to delivery services, the better. And I do want us to all be ordering from, our favorite restaurants who are still open right now, because that's helping them stay in business and, get through this terrible crisis. But, I'll wait and see, as we all will, to see sort of how this plays out. But it does make me feel yucky. And, I don't imagine that, our current legislators and the current administration would block such a huge consolidation at this point. But I think it's really something to think about. So my co-founder, Bernie Pollack, and I will watch the news sort of carefully over the next few days and weeks to see how this plays out, and maybe talk about it again, or maybe have those folks from Grubhub and Uber Eats on the show if they're willing to talk. But I don't know how this will benefit anyone but these large companies who are already really profiting at this time. So thanks for letting me complain a little bit. I now get to talk to somebody who I haven't had the chance to talk to before, because he entered his position at the National Farmers Union in March, right when all this stuff was going on. So it's really my pleasure to get to chat with Rob Larew, who serves as the president of NFU. And they're an organization that I've known for a long time. Their past president has spoken at food tank events. And they really advocate for, all food producers, farmers, fishers, and ranchers. And they do this at the federal level and provide assistance for these communities. Rob has a vast amount of experience in DC, working in Congress and the U.S. Department of Agriculture on agriculture policy and communication. Most recently, he was the staff director of the House Committee on Agriculture, where he oversaw the committee's efforts during the 2008 and 2014 farm bills. He previously served as the director of Congressional and Public Affairs at the Food Safety and Inspection Service at USDA, and worked as an agricultural aide to Representative Colin Peterson and the late Senator Paul Wellstone. So he's got a lot of experience. He also has his own dairy farm in West Virginia. Rob, welcome to Food Tank. I know this is your first interaction with us, so I'm really glad you could join us.
No, thank you very much. Obviously, the reputation for a good conversation and really pushing the ideas of what our food system should be, highlighting the challenges in it and promoting solutions is something that I've known Food Tank's reputation for a long time. So it's great to be with you, and it's great to visit.
Thanks so much. So I want to dive right in. You took over as president in March, and then, something that I guess we should have predicted happened, but it sort of surprised everyone. How has that been for you?
Well, it's been an exciting first several days here, and now months as this is growing on.
Right.
But obviously, we knew even before the current pandemic that farmers were under enormous stress. They were coming off of several years of very low, chronically low prices across the entire sector. And the trade battles that we have been having with China, et cetera, has just made the situation really very dangerous for farmers in terms of being able to continue. And then you add to that the really serious disruptions that we had with the pandemic, and the challenges are immense. But these are obviously challenges now that we're facing throughout the entire food chain.
Absolutely. And I mean, you used words like dangerous and stress, and I think this is a really critical time for farmers. I mean, farmer suicides in the United States were already, reaching sort of their own epidemic levels. Dairy farms are under a lot of stress. Pig and hog farmers have been under a lot of stress. What are you hearing from your members right now? What are their biggest concerns the longer the pandemic goes on?
Yeah, it's probably that fundamental question of whether or not they're even going to be able to continue. And as most folks probably realize, for farmers, I mean, this is like some other businesses, but it's very much their livelihood, right? They are tied to the land, they're tied. They feel so strongly about being a critical part of producing food and getting it to those that are in need. So it's incredibly stressful. It's one of the reasons why for years now, Farmers Union has really promoted mental health and access to treatment, and very good timing for us. But we scheduled a lot of training actually at our convention, which is now we're able to take advantage of in a number of critical states as hotlines are being lit up again by farmers who are in crisis. And thankfully, we now have additional folks who are prepared and able to talk to them and to tie them to resources. But this obviously highlights another challenge out there, right? And this isn't just in farming communities, but in rural communities in general. Access to mental health and quality rural healthcare in general. Right. It's an enormous piece of this whole challenge with the pandemic. So on top of the challenges of farms experiencing stress right now financially, the mental anguish, whether it's not being able to meet your bills or having to depopulate animals or euthanize animals, all of those things are really contributing to and highlighting a number of the challenges that rural communities have been facing for a long time, and they're now exasperated, and we have to deal with them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Why do you think we have been ignoring, and by we, I mean maybe the federal government and some political leaders, why have we been ignoring rural communities? They are the backbone of this nation. Farmers are the backbone of this nation in so many ways. But I feel like there's been sort of more of a focus on urban areas for, lots of different reasons. But why have we ignored the mental health of our farmers as well as, general health care?
Yeah, well, with mental health care in particular, I think that, as the country has, begun to kind of embrace the importance of this, I think you saw this natural trend where that originated in urban and suburban areas and less so to rural areas. But I think probably the fundamental challenges with access to quality care, whether it's healthcare of any front, is really those other infrastructure things that have just been long ignored. Things like broadband and access to telemedicine, telehealth issues there. This has been a fight for a long time. You asked a good question. Why has it been ignored for so long? That's a question that we have. I think there was a perception that these are issues that didn't face rural America, and that the infrastructure was not as important as they may have, they now see. And so one of perhaps the positive things that is coming out of this pandemic is a renewed focus on infrastructure needs in rural communities, because as you well know, rural communities not only depend on farmers staying on the land, but also small businesses in town remaining strong. And that requires quality health care. It's the reason why you get and recruit quality teachers, all of these things fit together. And when you lose those key pieces of the infrastructure, or farms consolidate, go out of business, that just makes the entire community a little bit weaker and harder to sustain.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought up this question of, rural broadband. I think we assume that everyone's connected to the internet, and I've traveled so much internationally, especially in the global South. And when my mom lived in Missouri, where I'm originally from, I would often say that I had better internet connections, traveling the world than I did in my mom's house. And that's because of this lack of infrastructure for rural places. And I wonder if now the sort of, people will realize that, that it's not so easy for farmers to pivot. We've heard so much on these live casts with different experts. Oh, well, farmers can start selling online and they can do CSAs. And yeah, farmers who have connections to the internet can, set up an online marketplace. They can do different things. But if they don't have that ability, it's really hard for them to not just, not only get services, but to sell their products.
No, that's absolutely right. And that's a good point to raise here. I mean, certainly, not the entire farming sector is in trouble. The vast majority of it is, but there are some pockets around population centers where right now business is booming because they are able to pivot. And there have been some states like Pennsylvania that has done an amazing job of connecting their farmers with buyers. And so, there are some positive stories there, but why are those successful? It's because they have the infrastructure there to make it happen. And so it's not only this question of making sure that farmers can pivot to the marketplace, but also in terms of these families and these rural communities, they lose a lot of their young folks and their young talent, in part because their jobs, which they might be able to do by teleworking, is simply not an option because the speeds are not high, or maybe they're using satellite service. I mean, it's just so unreliable. So a lot of those options where you may have family members who could stay behind and help with the family farm, and also keep their other job that maybe has access to health insurance, et cetera. It's not an option, and that's a real shame for all of us.
Right, and that's a good reminder that so many farmers, either they themselves or a member of their family has to have a second job in order to get, healthcare and other things, because farmers are really sort of, a lot of them are living on the edge and they can't afford, quality healthcare and that kind of thing. I know that you work with all different sizes of farmers, from very small to very large. Do you see this sort of centralization and maybe consolidation of the food system impacting some of the challenges that these farmers face? I mean, we've been hearing a lot, in different, from different experts about how we need to focus more on regional and localized food systems. But so many, I know, of the farmers you work with are part of a bigger, supply chain. Do you think they're worse? They're better off or worse off than they were pre-pandemic?
Oh, I think there's no doubt that the pandemic has made things more challenging for all of those farmers, all of our members in those spaces, related to the consolidation. I mean, this consolidation in the farm kind of processing end, as well as the fertilizers and the other inputs, seeds, all across agriculture, consolidation and concentration has been an enormous challenge for well over 20 years. We've had tons of mergers and acquisitions. You made reference to the ones being considered now with Uber's potential acquisition of Grubhub. These are a very similar cases. You now have only 4 companies, only one U.S. company that controls 87%, 86% of the national beef market. It's a very similar percentage for pork. And so what this has in terms of direct effect on family farmers is that it inevitably, just because of the level of concentration in the marketplace, raises their prices. gives them fewer choices of what they can do and what they can purchase, and stymies innovation. So
Right.
all of those things are contributing to a number of problems. We've seen also a shift in farms and farm sizes over the last several years. The effect this is having is that farms are getting larger, and you also are seeing growth in very small farms. But these middle family-sized farms that are really the heart and soul of these rural communities is the folks that are not able to make those pivots, if you will. And that's not only the reasons of infrastructure, but it is very much tied to this concentration in the marketplace. With more regional, local access to processors, they would have certainly much more options in order to survive.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I didn't ask that question very eloquently, but I think what I was trying to get at is that while big ag is profiting a lot right now, I from my perspective at least, I think big food and big ag, at least for now, are fine. They're kind of thriving under these circumstances, and but farmers are not, and that's sort of what the crux of this. While big agricultural input companies and big food are making money, the farmers themselves are not. And this has been an ongoing problem. The share of what farmers get from sales of their own products continues to drop dramatically.
No, that's absolutely right. And we also know that there's also been throughout these industries a level of vertical integration within these, so that the farmer's actual impact in order to make a living is increasingly tied very much to these large corporations. The chicken industry is almost entirely vertically integrated at this point. Right. Farmers are given the animals right, they feed them, and then they go on up. The pork industry is dominated by vertical integration, and what that has created right now is a situation where if you're an independent hog producer, and with so many plants either shut down or very much reduced production, your hogs go to the back of the line. And so only those hogs that farmers have that are actually owned by the Smithfields, et cetera, are the ones who get in and are able to be processed. So it's just more and more pressure on those independent folks. Yeah. In the market, there's a lot of independent cattle ranchers still. However, because you have so few big companies who are the so-called packers, the folks doing the processing, they are now being reviewed for price manipulation. We have a class action lawsuit from last summer. This isn't a new phenomena in this market, but as the pandemic hit, very low cattle prices for live cattle that ranchers receive were already low. They took a 30 to 35% hit almost immediately, even as consumer and grocery shoppers' prices are going through the roof right now. So we know where the profits are going, and so yes, it's a huge problem.
Right. So in terms of what the National Farmers Union is doing to help, the farmers who belong to your organization, can you talk about some of the actions you're taking?
Yeah, well, obviously, legislatively, so that we have three basic tenets at Farmers Union, and it's legislation, education, and cooperation. And on the legislative side, we're obviously in there fighting very hard for Congress to deliver the types of assistance that is going to be critically important to keep farmers on the land. But it's also about making sure that they're providing proper equipment and resources to rural hospitals and healthcare centers to make sure that they are prepared to deal with the pandemic as it makes its way into rural America. And it is also about making sure that we don't lose sight from a human dignity point of view of the workers that are in these processing facilities and workers all along the food chain, that we are not somehow sacrificing or turning our heads for the important need to protect their health. There is just an essential need there. So for all of those things that we're pushing up there, we are also turning our attention directly to our members with a lot of education material. Our website is loaded with information on mental health tools, as well as a lot of educational material from everything from grade school all the way through to adult education, trying to help them manage.
So nfu.org is the website if people want to find out more. Can you talk a little bit more about that third tenet of cooperation? So you mentioned legislative work, educational work. How does the cooperation angle fit into all of this?
Yeah, no, thank you. So Farmers Union's history began in 1902 in Texas, and it was really at a time when, much like today, there was an enormous concentration in where farmers were able to buy their seeds, where they were able to ship their products to, and the railroads. And this was also the time that we finally had the federal government beginning to take a look at busting up a lot of these large monopolies. Now, over the time since then, we've gotten back into that situation. At the same time, they were looking for ways to increase farmers' leverage and abilities to work together. And so this was also the birth of cooperative system in general, something that Farmers Union is very proud of, to be a big part of a lot of these early cooperatives. So this is a big part of what we do right now, is provide education on what a cooperative is, how it might be useful to a collection of farmers, either to help purchase products that they might need, or to market their products.
Sure.
It's been one of those things to help keep family farmers collectively in good shape.
Absolutely. And it's hard to predict what will happen, during this pandemic and post-pandemic, but I feel like this cooperative system, that some farmers may not have, wanted to be a part of, they're realizing the benefits of it now. And I think that's something that will keep growing. Do you think so?
I think so. I think there's, I'm perhaps an eternal optimist here, but it is my hope that on the other side of this, that consumers, first of all, will have a better understanding of their food system, and they will help lead the push along with farmers to reduce some of the complexity, if you will, and make a more direct system, one that is better for consumers and for farmers. And along with that, I think that the cooperative model, whether it's with farmers, or there are lots of types of businesses where that is a really helpful, useful tool.
Right.
I do think that
the
reemergence of it.
Yeah, I hope so too. And we need more eternal optimists, as far as I'm concerned. I think farmers are often blamed for a lot of, these problems. But what you just pointed out is that they respond to consumer demand. So if consumers are pushing for these things, because we now as eaters have a better understanding of where our food comes from and who produces it and how those people are treated, and whether they're working in a processing plant or on a farm, farmers and the food industry, I think, I hope, respond to those worries and concerns that consumers are having about where their food comes from.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be, helpful to have consumers better educated on that. We're trying to do our part in making that happen. But I think it's also, as they go to restaurants, Farmers Union, North Dakota Farmers Union, a number of those family farms up there, about 43,000 of them, are majority owner of a series of restaurants in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And it's those patrons there that understand that when they purchase a steak, that it is coming from a local, regional, something outside of the corporate kind of infrastructure, which is helpful, all along the way. Part of the challenge with not only this concentration and the stymie of innovation and higher prices, et cetera, is also that part of that innovation, quite frankly, is dealing with other large challenges that hopefully we can continue to work on, such as climate change.
Right.
Et cetera. Farmers have enormous opportunity to be a huge part of the solution here. At the same time, they are very much beholden, unfortunately, when they have just a couple places to purchase their seeds, just a couple places to purchase other inputs, and then market their products. So the more variation we have in that marketplace, the easier it is for farmers to be a big part of the solution.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so ironic that agriculture is probably, the industry that will be most affected by climate change, as we're already seeing, all over the world. But it also is the industry with the sort of greatest opportunity help mitigate and adapt to, and even in some cases reverse the effects of climate change. So, I think that's such a great reminder that while we're going through this terrible crisis, we also need to deal with the other problems that are facing the food and agriculture community, and climate change is certainly a big one. I also think that the loss of young people on farms that you mentioned before, we really do need to invest in making rural areas vibrant, fun places where people want to stay. And I think this is something that's not only true in the United States, but all over the world, where you see farmers aging in places like sub-Saharan Africa. Those communities need the same sort of investment that we do here. So I think we have it's a situation where we could probably be learning from other parts of the world.
No, absolutely. And it's just an echo back to some of the earlier points, the questions around access to broadband, for example, and quality healthcare. If you don't have those key essential pieces, critical infrastructure, it's hard to keep young families in those areas. The access to jobs just aren't there. And so I think if you want to see the strength of these communities grow, it's going to require a significant investment in those infrastructures. We work pretty closely with the American Federation of Teachers, who came to us a number of years ago because they recognize that their quality teachers that want to stay in rural communities, they want that quality of life that it presents, that having family farmers in that community, small businesses on Main Street, and all of the pieces with it. So it obviously takes a huge coalition for these efforts, but it's one that we're going to continue to fight for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there, are so many opportunities post-pandemic. For, I see so many young people interested in agriculture, and on the other side of this, I think we have people who have trained to be farmers, but they don't have access to land. But I think if we can figure out a structure after this, where like you said, you have rural areas have access to good healthcare, they have access to restaurants to go to, they have places where they feel safe and content. That there will be more opportunities for these young people who are interested in becoming part of the food and farming system that they haven't had before, that there will be more access to land, that their student loan debt will be alleviated, that they'll, have more opportunities than they've had, pre-pandemic.
Well, we're touching on a number of themes here that I'll keep repeating, but we need stronger antitrust enforcement. We cannot get a handle on the consolidation and concentration. We are just going to continue to see family farms going out of business, larger farms buying up that land. So you talk about access to land and making opportunities and available for young and beginning farmers. It just makes those challenges even greater. So along with that critical infrastructure there, we must have antitrust enforcement. That's
absolutely correct. And, we need more campaign finance reform. A lot of things need to happen, I think, to get us to where we need to go. And I don't say that in a dismissive way. I just feel like if, during this kind of reflective time, I know we're all very busy. We're still continue to be busy with numerous Zoom calls and, interviews with people like you. But I think this is a time to reflect on kind of what kind of food system do we actually want, and how can we get there? And so many great minds like yours and others are really thinking very hard about this right now. So I want to emphasize that this is an incredible opportunity for both eaters and producers and workers all along the food supply chain to really make visible what has been invisible, because people don't understand that this consolidation is going on. They're only sort of awakening now to where their food comes from. So again, it's just a really, I'm not making light of this terrible tragedy, but I do think this is an incredible opportunity.
No, I think that's a fair point. And obviously another piece of this that really needs some innovation and critical thinking of ways to improve it is making that connection between those that are producing the food and perhaps processing it, and those in need, not just the buyers on the end, restaurants and grocery stores, but obviously the hunger community has not been well served, at least in the early days of this pandemic, as we see the number of unemployed and those requesting access to either food banks or SNAP, the so-called food stamps at USDA. What we have not done a good job of is making that pivot very quickly and effectively to connecting some of the surplus product that was out there that farmers unfortunately were getting low prices for and could not get rid of because of other problems within the supply chain. And obviously those in need who were looking for help. So I certainly hope that one of the other positive things and critical kind of review is how can we do better? We need to do better.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, you can go to nfu.org to find out more about the National Farmers Union. My last question for you, Rob, I know you're constantly talking to your members. Is there anyone in particular who's especially inspiring to you right now, who's giving you a lot of hope as you learn, your way through your position and navigate this pandemic?
Yeah, well, there's a number of them. We have a number of members, some cattle ranchers, for example, in Oklahoma, who are stepping up in incredible ways to not only make sure that their neighbors are safe, because we have had suicide watch there for a number of families. It's been a very serious, critical time, but they've been there to help out. And then they also, in spite of the fact that they are losing enormous amounts of money on their own operations, are using the product that they do have to make sure that they tie that into food banks. And we've seen this donation of food actually in a number of states, and it's just been incredible because I think a very human, natural reaction would be to very focus on your own problems and your challenges. They've been reaching out to their communities and trying to make those connections and those ties. So that's been probably one of the most inspiring pieces so far of even as we have our own challenges, trying to help those in need.
That's great. That's great. Rob, I should have asked before, do you want to give out the hotline information or where farmers can go, or is that on the NFU website?
It's all very easily accessed on our website. Thank you for sharing that, www.nfu.org. Access to farmer mental health resources. There's also state level resources, everything COVID. It's all there. Thank you.
Wonderful. So again, nfu.org, we'll have that available on our website and social media as well. So you can go to foodtank.com to find out more information about Rob and the National Farmers Union. I'm so glad you could join me today, Rob. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. This has been great.
A reminder that this episode will also be on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And please join me for my next episode when I'll be talking to Dr. Dariush Mazafarian, the Dean of the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy at Tufts University. Stay well, Rob. Thank you so much.
Thank you.